Good evening, everyone. It is February 28th, and we are here for a work session of the City Council. We'll start with public comment on non-agenda items. Anybody wishing to speak to the council has 3 minutes. If you're in person, go ahead and come up. If you're on Zoom, raise your hands. Okay, seeing none, we will close the public comment period and begin our work session on pavement condition index. Director Webb or City Engineer, welcome.
Thank you, Your Honorable Mayor, members of council. Excited to kind of present this to you guys tonight. This has been a fun project that we've been working on for quite a while now, and kind of some neat technology that we've been using on it. Definitely want to thank all the public works staff that's worked on it. It's taken quite a bit and everything with that. I'll kind of introduce Zeb Coulter. He's kind of been one of our engineers and the project manager on this. I don't think you guys have met Zeb too much. He's been at the city for about a year now. He kind of is from the area here originally. Went to school at the University of Wyoming, graduated with a master's in transportation engineering, and then he went into the Army and had a pretty successful career there, at least in my opinion and everything. And actually, when we hired him, he was teaching civil engineering at West Point. So we're very happy to have Zeb. He's brought a lot of great knowledge and a great asset to the engineering team. So with that, I'll kind of let... Green is good. I'll let Zeb take over, and we'll kind of go from there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jepp. Mr. Coulter, welcome.
Thank you, honorable mayors, council members. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been a long time in the making having this opportunity to present this to you today. We've budgeted for it for a long time, and we're able to execute it this year. So the initial plan, this is realigning our baseline for our pavement condition index for the city. So previously we had used a manual method to survey about 10% of the overall city, which would give you a good idea of each street. But we decided that the best way forward was to be able to get a full view and use the most current technology available. There's a great technology that came available in the last few decades, so we went with an RFQ process and selected a highly qualified IMS team led by Mr. Kirk Kiefer, and he's the president, and we're very honored to have him here today to present on the findings. And then we're also really excited to be able to move forward in the future of maintaining, starting from this baseline and being able to repeat and have that repeatability of this full survey of our network and be able to utilize that data to best improve our city streets. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kiefer for the presentation. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Seb. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and if you guys could just let me know if it's showing up, I would appreciate that. And let me see here. How does that look?
It looks just fine.
Looks just fine. I'm going to try something dangerous here. I'm going to put it in presenter mode, and hopefully this will work as well. So let me give this a shot.
Okay, we wish you well.
Thank you. All right. You still see it?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Very good. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to present our presentation this evening and the findings from the pavement condition survey that we performed for Laramie last year, and the analysis and results that we'll be presenting tonight reflect the work of Zeb and his team and my colleague Sadaf Khosravafar, who unfortunately was stricken with a flu yesterday and is not able to be here tonight to present. However, my colleague Caitlin Parsons will be speaking to one part of the project that we also performed for you guys, an asset inventory for some of the city's assets, including a sidewalk, a rough sidewalk inventory as well. And she'll be speaking at the end of the presentation regarding those topics. So just a quick overview of the presentation here. We'll start with an overview of the city's existing pavement conditions and the pavement management process in general. And we'll jump into review of some of the findings, the local findings on the city's roads that we basically encountered during the survey. We collected a whole bunch of high-resolution imagery for the city, and so we'll be presenting some of those results or some of those findings just for everybody to kind of baseline our understanding of pavement conditions and what we mean when we're talking about different scores on a scale on the pavement condition index scale, the PCI scale. We'll then jump into the analysis and recommendations part of the proposal, and basically where we assess different funding levels, the city's current budget, as well as budgets needed to reach different goals that the city may have moving forward. And then Caitlin will speak to the sidewalks and ramps, the information that we collected for y'all as part of that survey. I think the best thing to do, the first 15 or so slides, I'll go through presenting our findings, basically the results of the pavement condition survey. Then I'll open it up for questions at that point. So if you guys have any questions, the first 15 or so slides that I'm going through, I'll have a break there, pause for any questions or comments, and then we'll jump into the analysis and reporting part of the presentation. I'll pause there after that, and then we'll finish with Caitlin's presentation on sidewalks and ramps. So with respect to pavement conditions, as I've mentioned, the city has been using the Pavement Condition Index, which ironically was developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it goes back to the U.S. Army here. It was developed back in the 1970s, basically as a baseline index for the Department of Defense to assess the condition of all of the roadways that were deteriorating after the massive mobilization during World War II. So Congress had all of these bases. They needed to figure out where to allocate funding for roads and parking lots and things like that. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers developed the Pavement Condition Index. It is an ASTM standard, and basically it provides an objective and repeatable measure of pavement condition. It's basically a report card, 0 to 100. A roadway that's a pavement that has a PCI score of 100 is in excellent condition. A+, a roadway that has or a pavement section or area pavement that has a PCI score of 0 really has seen better days and needs to be reconstructed and replaced. The PCI index is based off of pavement distresses such as alligator cracking, which indicates structural failure of the roads, potholes, which everyone's probably most familiar with. Patching is even a distress, longitudinal and transverse cracking. Those are different distress types. We measure the distress, we record the distress types, the severity of those distresses, how bad they are, and then the quantity of those distresses, and we calculate a PCI score. For the purposes of this presentation, any PCI below a 40 or 40 and below, that's considered a pavement that needs significant rehabilitation, and we call that pavement as being part of the backlog. Basically, roads that need significant rehabilitation, significant mill and overlay, or reconstruction. Our findings for this project, basically, just to put this in context, the city has about 124 miles, centerline miles of city-owned roads, okay? We found the average condition of the city's roadways to be 58. Okay, that's fair condition, okay? It's not terrible, it's not wonderful. It's kind of right there in between. Several agencies that we work with, we found average scores ranging from the mid-50s all the way up to the high 70s and low 80s. So it really depends on several variables: when the roads were constructed, the funding levels available to the agencies, and environmental conditions, soil conditions. All of that can affect the longevity of pavements and overall pavement conditions. So this figure here just shows a distribution of the condition of the city's roadways as a percentage of network area. So you can see the city has 13% in excellent condition, 19% in very good, and then there is a not insignificant percentage of the roadways in poor and marginal condition. Roadways that are in that fair condition, that fair condition, are on the downward trajectory. So those roads tend to be in kind of rough condition to begin with, and they're going to slip into the marginal and poor condition pretty quickly. So that's something to consider when looking at this graph. Any of those roads that are kind of there in the middle will most likely end up in marginal poor condition relatively quickly. The pavement management process here, and to kind of further illustrate that point, pavement life when you design a new road might last 20 years or so. but 40% of the life of that pavement, the pavement typically stays in pretty good shape. If it's designed properly, if it's designed for the roads and environmental conditions it's subject to, 40% of that life pavement's going to be in excellent, very good condition. However, once the initiation of cracking begins, or there's some structural issues with the pavement, maybe it was overloaded, or maybe there's some drainage issues, or the pavement's just getting old. Once that initial cracking begins and the initial failure begins, the life of that pavement deteriorates rapidly. So you can see a 40% drop in pavement condition over 15% of the pavement life, kind of right there in that middle. And the key concept here is keep your pavements in good condition. So any rehabilitation or any new pavements that you're putting in, or any roadways that are reconstructed or resurfaced, make sure that you're applying pavement preservation activities like the city's doing with chip seals, cape seals, things like that, which can cost $5.50 a square yard. Do that early, do it frequently, keep the roads in good condition, because once those pavements start to deteriorate, the cost for major rehabilitation, reconstruction, full depth reconstruction can increase significantly to upwards of $190 a square yard. These are numbers actually that the city is experiencing. So these are custom numbers that the city, that we've worked with the city to establish as represented numbers here, just for you to anchor off of. So when we're implementing a pavement management system, the city had been doing manual surveys. And this was the first step toward collecting more comprehensive data, a more comprehensive assessment of pavement conditions. That pavement assessment is done on a routine basis, typically every 3 years or so. And that condition assessment provides a measure of basically how long the pavements are lasting, whether or not the maintenance and rehabilitation strategies are working, whether or not the funding that the city is putting into the roadways is actually having the desired impact. So we go out, we assess conditions, we evaluate the performance of the pavements, are the priorities, the maintenance and repair strategies working, and then we go back to the city's objectives, policies, and ultimately budgets. Is enough money being spent, and is the money being spent on the right treatments? And that cycle continues forever. This is an evolutionary process, and things improve over time as new treatments become available, and the city gains a better understanding of the performance of their pavements. So the pavement condition survey itself was done with a very fancy system. I like to say it's $1 million van. We've got 8 of these things, but really it's just a tool. We go out, we collect 3D images of the pavement surface. We record all the cracks, the potholes, the distresses that are out there. But then our engineering team spends a lot of time interpreting that data and making heads or tails out of it, and making sure that all the distresses were correctly identified and that they're correctly classified. In addition to cracking, potholes, things like that, we also measured pavement roughness, basically how bumpy the roadway is, and we also measured the amount of rutting, basically the grooves in the roadway that you get from heavier truck traffic, or if you're studding up your tires and you're tearing apart the surface that way. So we got a whole bunch of measurements on that, and we calculated PCI scores for the entire network. Now, just for comparison's sake, Zebed mentioned that the city had been doing manual surveys, about 10% in the past. This go around, we did all lanes, all directions, so we got 100% coverage of the city's roadways. Now, for larger agencies, we might recommend doing an outer lane, one lane in one direction, outer lanes, or something like that. But due to the relatively small network that the city has, 124 miles isn't that big. The additional minor cost of doing all the lanes provides significantly more data and provides a much more repeatable measure of condition. So the city will be able to see how those roadways are deteriorating over time in a very detailed way, and see how those rehabilitation activities, maintenance and rehabilitation activities are performing. So here are just some examples of the images that we capture, and we have some automation that is able to detect cracking. We measure the widths of the cracks. We can even see crack sealing. We're able to detect those sealed cracks shown there. Any concrete pavement, should there be any, not many, able to detect that, as well as utilities from the 3D imagery that we're collecting. In addition to the imaging, we also did structural testing on the city's roadways using our falling weight deflectometer. We basically simulated a truckload, like a truck going over the surface of the pavement, and we measured the response of the pavement. This is true pavement engineering, pavement management. We are determining how the pavement responds under loading, and using the measured response of the pavement, we're able to determine, knowing the truck traffic, the remaining service life of the pavement. So this was a supplemental, this is additional testing to better understand where the pavements are, what were kind of the trajectory of the city's pavements as far as performance goes moving forward. We also worked with a contractor to collect cores of the pavements throughout the city. And this figure here is showing all the different soil strengths throughout the city in different colors. Basically, the green is good, the blue is bad, and there's not that much blue, but there's some green and yellow is pretty good. So you got some good soils up there. And then we did coring of the pavement structures to see exactly how thick the asphalt layers were, whether or not those asphalt layers were intact. So we did a really comprehensive study on that to further understand the pavement conditions. So here are a few representative photographs throughout the city. We have Riverside Drive here, which is in excellent condition, performing very, very well. We have another example here of Simmons Street, PCI of 76. Simmons Street and the previous slide here, Riverside Drive. Don't ignore these streets. They're in great shape. But like here on Simmons, we've got some crack sealing. This is a perfect candidate for crack sealing. Do the crack sealing, keep that pavement in good shape. Holiday Drive, we have, little bit more cracking. Also, I'm liking the fact that there is crack sealing on this road. That's helping to prevent moisture from getting into the base and subgrade of the pavement. That keeps the pavement, that structure dry and strong. So we're showing a PCI of 66, again, a candidate for preventive maintenance. Now we jump over to East Park Avenue, PCI 58. You can see there's been some patching out there. The surface is getting a little bit more deteriorated. This road, you can probably go a few more years. Don't have to do too much. The preventive maintenance is good, but it might be reaching the end of that life. We're probably looking more toward a mill and overlay or maybe a tape seal that might be able to buy a few more years for that road. Hodgman Street, 48. Here you can start to see that alligator cracking that I mentioned earlier. Kind of on this road, you're seeing that those patterns, they look like the back of an alligator. That's indicating some structural failure of the pavement. And that's showing signs of something, either some localized patching and a mill and overlay or something more significant, more costly. And then here we have Sheridan Street. Again, the city has done some localized patching to fix some issues on the pavement surface. But again, you guys can see the extensive cracking, alligator cracking, and this actually has some block cracking interconnected. So you have structural issues as well as some thermal fatigue issues on this pavement. Good candidate for something a little bit more significant from a repair perspective. And then lastly, we have, this is Steel Street. We've got lots and lots of alligator cracking. You should be able to see this through here. And then over here, we even have a pothole here. This is basically structurally failed. And this road is definitely a candidate for, a reconstruction. Basically start from scratch, go down, recompact, put down some new asphalt on top of that, address any drainage issues that there might be. Some of the curb and gutter here is broken up. That can be repaired as well. And that might be causing some moisture to get into the pavement structure. So let me jump back to this slide. I'd like to pause at this moment. Does anybody have any questions regarding what I've presented so far?
Council, any questions at this point? Okay, back to you.
Great, thank you. So now we talk, I'll jump into the pavement analysis and project planning phase of our project. So what we did the pavement condition survey. We took all of this information and we put it into a pavement management system. And for this project, we use Easy Street Analysis. It's a very convenient tool that we developed, believe it or not, in-house. I've been at the Corps of Engineers. There are different pavement management systems that are available, but for a network this size, Our Easy Street Analysis program is very, very convenient to use, and it allows a lot of sophisticated optimization based off of pavement condition index scores, structural testing of the pavement, the bumpiness, the roughness of the roads, as well as rutting values. So we use all of those measurements in developing in performing our analysis and then developing recommended projects for the city. So just to kind of zoom out here for a second, when we're doing an analysis, oftentimes I feel like the Grim Reaper coming into municipal agencies, because I'm always telling agencies the same thing. Not enough money is going into the roadway network. I think there have only been 2 experiences in my life where agencies have been adequately funded. And in this case, the city has a backlog that's pretty significant, and the existing funding level is currently based off of our survey and the analyses that we performed. It won't be able to kind of keep the conditions as they are, and it won't be able to maintain the city's existing backlog. That backlog, we're forecasting it with under existing funding to increase. So, but anyway, this becomes a bit of an art and a balancing act here. We're trying to take available resources, allocate them to the highest priority roads. So we're getting the biggest return on investment. And then we're also trying to see what strategies will work to increase the life of the pavements, and all the while also trying to increase funding along the way, and really work with the agencies, work with the city to figure out what exactly is acceptable to the city, what level of service is acceptable to the city, and what funding level will be required in order to attain that level of service for the residents. So, funding, of course, is not zero and it's not unlimited, even though we run both of those analyses to kind of frame the problem. So we ran a zero funding analysis and an unlimited funding analysis just to see how much money would be required to fix everything. We examined the effects of the current funding levels, the city's current funding levels. And then we also ran a couple analyses to determine how much funding would be required to maintain the city's existing PCI value, and then another analysis to determine what would be required to maintain the backlog. Basically, 2 analyses, one to maintain the average conditions, and then another to maintain the backlog. I know those 2 might seem related. They are, but they're actually not, they're not a one-to-one relationship. And then we also ran a few analyses to figure out what funding levels would be required or necessary to decrease deterioration or minimize deterioration of the pavements. It is important to note that we don't base our analysis on a worst first approach. So just because a pavement is in terrible shape doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be number 1 on the list of roads to repair. We do like to focus funding. We like to recommend and encourage agencies to prioritize roads that are most heavily trafficked. So the roads that are getting the most traffic, we want to keep those in the best condition possible because they're serving the most residents and they have a higher functional classification. And additionally, some roads, if they're very low volume, they're failed. They're not going to get any worse. The additional, if you defer that maintenance, it's not going to increase your backlog that much over time because it's essentially already failed. So we went through a very comprehensive M&R maintenance and rehabilitation planning routine with the city. Zeb and his colleagues gave us unit costs, gave us the recommendations that the city is currently implementing, and we incorporated all of those into our analysis flow that we were running. So we didn't just pull something out of a black box and run it. We actually customized our analysis so that it really is in alignment with what the city is currently doing and the city's best practices. Those unit costs that I showed earlier, we incorporated those into our planning. So here we can see, PCI score in the 70s, that $5.50 a square yard that I showed on that slide earlier. That's actually from the city. That's the price for chip seals and cape seals. The $70, well, actually just jumping down to the $190 per square yard, that's for full depth reconstruction of the city's roads. So we use those unit costs from the city in our analysis. Now, inflation has been a disaster, okay? It's been all over the place. We've seen it upwards of 8%. It's been coming down. For this analysis, we assumed 5% inflation over the next 5-10 years, okay? So that hopefully that's a little bit aggressive. So when we rerun the analyses or we're doing an update, we need to kind of, reassess some of these assumptions. And these assumptions can, as you can imagine, have a huge impact on required funding levels. I mean, these are not insignificant quantity or values or dollars that we're talking about here. So Here's the punchline. We ran several analyses. First and foremost, Laramie's current budget right now that includes, we assume that the SPT funds would continue, okay, but that's not necessarily a guarantee. So Laramie's current budget, we're looking at 3.1 million per year. That's shown in green here, okay? So if we're running 3.1 million per year over the next 5 years, we're seeing a final PCI value dropping down to a 53, and the backlog, I think, from 22 up to 38%. So that's not necessarily moving in the right direction as far as improving overall conditions. If the city won the lottery, could print cash, fix everything, we'd be looking at $170 million over 5 years. So divide 5 into 170, and that would be the annual expenditure needed to fix everything and bring the network average condition up to an 86, which would be remarkable. But again, that's kind of the upper bound. That'd be to get everything in great shape. And then with zero funding over the next 5 years, we're looking at a decrease, from a 56 all the way down to 46 or so. So almost a 10-point drop over the next 5 years. So somewhere in between there is the right answer. And it's, with the existing funding, we're just showing that doesn't necessarily maintain conditions. It does result in a lower PCI at the end of 5 years and an increase in the backlog. In order to maintain the current backlog, okay, in order to keep the backlog from growing, wait for it, 14.7 million per year, approximately 15 million per year. That's 5 times the city's existing budget is what we're forecasting to be necessary to maintain the current backlog. Okay. Now, this is based off of one study. It's a snapshot in time, based off of unit cost assumptions, inflation numbers, and things like that. This will change over time. This isn't deterministic by any means, but it is showing kind of the order of magnitude required to kind of keep that backlog from getting much worse. In order to maintain the current PCI value right around 57, we're looking at now this is where it gets a little bit weird, about 7.9 million per year. Okay. And with that, the average PCI stays the same. So we're fixing roads, we're increasing the condition on the high end, but we're still seeing that backlog, those roads in poor condition, that's still increasing, and they're dropping below a 40, and that backlog is creeping up to a 34%. So even more than doubling, we're still seeing an increase in that backlog, even though the overall conditions are staying the same. On average. Okay, average conditions across the network. So with the city's current funding level of 3.1, here's the green bars are showing the distribution of conditions today. Okay, and this is similar to the earlier slide. And then 5 years from now, and I should mention, we started the analysis. We assumed an analysis start date of July 1st of 2023, just to kind of tie that in a little bit in the future. So we deteriorated the road conditions and began our 5-year analysis on July 1st, 2023. 5 years from then, we'd be anticipating, again, that average condition dropping from a 57 to a 53, the backlog increasing almost 13 points, from a 24 to a 37, and then 10 years out, and 10 years we're kind of looking into a crystal ball. It's difficult to kind of forecast that far into the future, but we would be, with those funding levels, we'd essentially be seeing the downward continued deterioration of the average of the network down to a 49 or thereabouts. Big error bars on that. Okay, so the further out we get, the less confidence I speak about anything, but we would see that backlog increasing quite a bit as well. And it is, I just want to again repeat that, the 3.1 million includes the SPT funds, not necessarily a slam dunk on those being available over the foreseeable future, but we did include those in the analysis. So recommendations before I open it up for questions. I think it's probably best to, for agencies, cities size, we like to see a backlog, even more importantly than the PCI score of 65. That backlog is really again, being the Grim Reaper, that's basically the inheritance that you're bequeathing to future generations, that backlog. So it's good to minimize that backlog and keep that below 20%, if not more. I'd really like to see that get below 15, 10% and whittle away at that backlog any which way possible. We are seeing, as with the current funding levels, an increase in the city's backlog over the next 5 years, 10 years. And, that's a significant, that's just going to get more expensive to maintain and to manage over time. I think with the current funding scenario, the prioritization of the funding is critical. So making sure that the funding that the city does have is spent on the roadways that are most heavily trafficked, that the people are going to benefit from the most. Use whatever the study or the analyses can do to help maybe get some additional funding, some supplemental funding would be ideal as well. And then really just try to target the limited funds that are available on the roadways, again, that can benefit from that the most. And then, again, this is just the first study. Every 2 to 4 years, 3 years on average, let's come back, do a study, see how how the pavements are deteriorating. Since it was only one point in time, we made some assumptions regarding deterioration. We might come back and find out that, things are deteriorating a lot faster. Hopefully not. Or we might find out that they're deteriorating a little bit slower, and that might result in lower funding needs over time. But that's really something that's specific to each agency that we work with, and that data becomes the time series data of pavement condition improves our overall forecasting over time. So with that, before I hand things off to my colleague Caitlin, are there any questions on our findings and analysis results?
Council, do you have any questions about what you've heard so far? Okay, I think we're going to hold our questions for just a minute.
I just wanted to...
just kidding, Vice Mayor.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask clarification on recommendation number 2. The second part of that, MPCI of approximately 49 and a backlog of 47 in 5 years, the previous said in 5 years, and so I was wondering, is that in 10 years? They say the same thing, only the forecasts are different.
Sorry.
So it's on recommendations, the second one. At city's current funding.
I'm sorry. No, you're absolutely here. Yep. Let me do this right now. Good catch. Perfect. Sorry. There we go. So many numbers, I get bleary-eyed. Yes, you are correct. That is correct.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other questions, Council?
Mayor, I have a question.
Sure. Go ahead, Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I have 2 questions I'll just put out there. The first is, I'm assuming that this doesn't include any kind of analysis on the dirt roads in town. This is just the paved roads. And the follow-up to that question is, does your analysis take into account the damage being done to on the transitions between paved and dirt roads in West Laramie? We see quite a bit of wear and tear on those transitions. There's a section of town in West Laramie where it's only paved 1 block off of the highway, and then it transitions back to dirt. Is that something you guys included in your analysis at all?
We did not do a PCI score for the unpaved road. So anything that was dirt, we did not calculate a PCI score for. I'll defer to Zeb as far as the roads that were partially paved before they went to dirt. Were those segments included in the analysis?
Mr. Coulter, go ahead.
Honorable Mayor, through you. So they were not in, but we did do the roadway. So as they transition in, that's captured and that's looked at. So and that averages out through the whole score of the roadway out there in the West Laramie. So mainly like Pierce and Johnson, Colorado, all those type roadways I believe she's talking about will be looked at. You'll be able to see it in the pictures, and then it's averaged out. So, but those intersections, it's part of the overall analysis of that section of road.
Thank you, Councilor Somerville. Any follow-up before I go to the Vice Mayor?
No, Mayor, that answers my question. Thank you.
You bet. Vice Mayor?
I was just curious if, in the analysis, you looked at areas of town where there's been major construction and heavy equipment in and out to determine or ascertain the damage or possible accelerated damage in those areas.
Yes. So any roadway that was subject, so we did the coring and the structural testing on the arterial and collector roadways throughout the city, so the more heavily trafficked roads. So those were subject to some of that construction traffic. And so that analysis, we can go back, and it's actually a very insightful question. With the impact of that construction traffic, if we test before and after the construction is performed so if we do a pre-construction and post-construction inspection, we can pretty accurately measure the impact of the construction traffic on the road. But with just one survey, it's difficult to assess the actual impact. So if we come in after the construction was done, without knowing what the condition of the roadway was before the construction, what the structural capacity of the roadway was before, it's difficult to assess exactly or allocate what damage was caused by the construction traffic. So there are some ways that we could look at that data, maybe if there was channelized traffic for the construction of some area, or some construction traffic that was channelized along a road, and maybe the construction traffic only went on one segment of the roadway and it didn't impact the other, an adjacent segment, we might be able to compare the segment that didn't have construction traffic to the segment that did have construction traffic and see if there's a difference between those two. But what we did do, that we look at construction traffic as a temporary event, so it's not necessarily something that's going to persist on the pavement surface. So when we're doing a longer term analysis with this, we're assuming that we're just going to go back to normal traffic, normal loading, not a persistent construction traffic loading. Did that answer your question?
Somewhat, yes. I think it did. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilors, any other questions?
Mayor, I'll have one.
Yeah, Councilor Gabriel, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. Just curious, with the construction of the dorms at UW, you see those heavy trucks all over the city at different locations carrying all kinds of, dirt, and then we'll have equipment coming in here later on. And I think that goes to the Vice Mayor's question concerning that construction just began about a month ago. And I just wonder about the impact that's going to have over the next 2.5 years of that construction on the dorms.
Excellent question. So me being the vindictive pavement engineer that I am, I like to assess fees to all construction traffic whenever possible. So if this traffic began a month ago, that's well after our initial survey was performed. So one thing that we could do if the council would like to see the impact of that construction traffic on the condition of the roads is we can basically come back after the construction is done and reassess the condition of those roads, both visually with our 3D scanner to assess cracking, and probably more importantly with our falling weight deflectometer. This would then, doing that type of testing would actually measure the damage that was done to the pavement, so we could do an assessment of that. Now the question becomes, with that data, we'd most likely see some damage done to the roadways, and we would compare the roadways. Again, we'd have to do a comparison between the roadways that had construction on them versus similar roadways that did not have construction on them, so we could see what the relative impact of the construction was. And then with that information, you may be able to assess a fee or consider assessing a fee, but that becomes more of an administrative thing, and I'm not sure if that would be something that the council would be interested in exploring. We have done impact fees for utility cut patching, where if there are utilities that come in and trench in the right-of-way, we can assess the damage associated with that type of trenching, and agencies Burlington, Vermont, Prince George's County, Maryland, City of Los Angeles have done studies like that to assess a fee to companies that cut into the pavement surface. We've done garbage, like heavy garbage trucks coming in. Now we have recycling garbage. Sometimes people are having trash pickup multiple times a week. Those vehicles have an impact on local roads, and we've come up with fees for that. So temporary construction traffic, though, we could explore that. I'd be happy to explore that with you further if that's something that council would be interested in.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? Councilor Richardson.
Thank you. To follow up on that, do you also have that data available that could be accessed from other cities that we could, evaluate as kind of a comparison piece if we aren't able to do that follow-up, just to have, because I'm assuming that you collect quite a bit of data and have some general information regarding those impacts.
Yeah, we actually have it published. I worked on a textbook with my former colleague at the Corps of Engineers. We have some case studies in a textbook that provides some examples of how that data can be used. And I'd be happy to provide those as a reference to council. And with respect to the other studies, the only caution I have with that is given the soil conditions and the traffic that the roads are subject to, they do vary. The impact varies significantly from agency to agency. So I wouldn't want to mislead anybody into thinking that what may have impacted Cheyenne is going to be similar to, or the impacts in Cheyenne might be similar to Laramie or something like that. But generally speaking, I'd be happy to provide some references for your review of previous studies.
Thank you, Councilor Richardson. Councilor Somerville, you have your hand up, and then we'll go to you, Councilor Shumway.
Mayor, no need. I just forgot to put it down. My apologies.
No problem at all. Councilor Shumway.
Thank you, Your Honor. Over the past 10 to 15 years, the state has invested over $1 billion in construction at the University of Wyoming. There will be another $1 billion in probably the next 5 to 10 years. And they did come up with a number, and I can't remember what it was, that they were going to have contribution to the city, but I think it was for underground infrastructure, not surface infrastructure. Now, there never has been what we call PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. Obviously, there's a huge impact that this kind of construction puts on the city. And short of asking for a disaster area, I don't know what we're going to do to offset the huge expense that the university and state has placed upon our city that no other city has because of the enormous construction that's going on within our city. And the assistant manager Feeser probably knows that number. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million that they were going to contribute to the city for oversizing water lines and things like that. But I don't know what the number is. Obviously, look at the numbers we have received tonight are not even close. But I wondered if there is a contribution and when it's going to come, and if it's been delayed or if we're receiving it.
Councilor Shumway, I'm not sure if this is what you're recalling, but there was a component of the House bill that funded the dorms, but it was specific for a traffic study. Is that the money you're thinking of? I think it was only $300,000 maybe.
Okay, well.
But that may be what you're thinking. I don't recall another funding, but you have more experience than I do in this council.
I was on that committee, and there was a number that was coming up to where they would contribute for the infrastructure underground. And I don't know if, because I moved off that committee obviously when I moved, but I wondered if there's anything that is there, and if not, it's just unfair. It's unfair to our municipality for them to make such a huge impact without any compensation.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? Yeah, Councilor Pierce, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little different direction. Not that I at all disagree with what Councilor Shumway mentioned, but I'm curious in terms of truck traffic off I-80. In our study, will we be able to see particular impact around those exits and entrances, just based on when the highway closes and we just kind of get bombarded with like stacked up trucks and stuff? Is that something like that noticeable or impactable to those streets in that part of the city? And it's probably more of a question to our staff.
Mr. Coulter, go ahead.
Mayor, through you. So with that, we'll note that a lot of the roadways coming directly off the interstates are wideouts right away. And so most of those that we see stacked up would be mostly on Pierce, right by Pilot or McHugh Street. And so when we do future pavement condition indexes, we will be able to see the impact of those slow deteriorations of that roadway maybe more significantly in those areas, and we will pay attention to those. And if they're getting the heavy loading, then that will be taken into consideration when we look into that analysis. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Doherty.
The slide number 27, where you have the impact of funding levels on pavement conditions, and you were talking about if we won the lottery, like what it would take. That's per year though, right? It's not like we could.
The first one was
5. Okay, so we'd have to come up with that kind of money. We'd have to win the lottery every year. So buy your tickets. Isn't that, yes, okay.
That is correct.
Okay, and then I'll wait for the other question, thanks.
Any other questions, councilors? Okay, we will be back to you all on the presentation.
Thank you very much. And I will turn the presentation over to my colleague Caitlin to speak to the imagery-based asset survey that we performed.
Thank you, Kurt. So while we were collecting the pavement data, our LCMS vans are outfitted with 4 outward-facing cameras. And so while we were completing the pavement inventory, we were capturing imagery in 20-foot intervals using these cameras. And they're positioned in such a way that we're capturing imagery at nearly 360 degrees around the data collection vehicle. So what this essentially does is create a full network imagery database, all of which is georeferenced. And we are able to use those images that we capture in conjunction with satellite imagery to create detailed asset GIS inventories of anything visible in the right-of-way. Next slide, please. For the city of Laramie, we developed a sidewalk inventory and a curb ramp inventory. Each feature we captured was assigned specific attributes that we had discussed with Zeb and his team prior to the beginning of the data collection effort. These attributes include material type, construction style, condition of the feature, etc. Next slide, please. Using this information, we were able to assign a ranked score to each ramp that we captured. On this slide, we refer to that as ramp type. Type 1 ramps, for example, on the top left, appear to meet design standards based on our visual review. Type 2 ramps may have minor issues, such as missing truncated dome plates or missing back curbs if required by the design style. Type 3 ramps have 2 or more deficiencies, and type 4 ramps have many or excessive deficiencies that need to be addressed. We also categorize ramps or curb ends that don't fit nicely into a specific design category during this process. And our goal in doing this is, even though the survey itself is visual, to give some sort of score. In case that there's an effort to go out and rehabilitate ramps using this data, you can quickly identify those that are in the worst shape. Next slide, please. As you can see, the majority of the ramps in the network fall into the type 2 category, so just with slight deficiencies, and about half the ramps fall into either type 1 or type 2. So for the most part, the ramps appear to be in good shape. And our total ramp count in the network was about 3,100 ramps. Next slide, please. Thank you. We also assigned condition scores to the sidewalk segments that we drew in. So this is based, again, it's a visual assessment, but we're keeping an eye out for distress densities, severe distresses that we're observing along the segment, and assigning a good, fair, or a poor value to each sidewalk segment that we've developed as part of this inventory. The total mileage for the network, the sidewalk network, is about 189 miles. Of that, there's also an additional 36 miles that we identified areas that are missing sidewalks. But ultimately, the sidewalks appear to be in good condition, with almost 80% of them being in good condition. Next slide, please. Ultimately, this data is intended to provide a cursory overview of the state of the pedestrian network, but it sets the city up well to pursue more detailed data collection methods for ADA compliance reporting, for example, if they so desire. So this slide's just demonstrating some of the other data collection capabilities that IMS offers. So, for example, we have a mobile LiDAR system that we can deploy and essentially capture a 3D model of the network, which we can then use to extract measurements about the ramps, which, you know, it was not part of the visual survey, but for ADA compliance reporting, we can capture running and cross slope information, landing dimensions, flare dimensions, et cetera. All of that information that's relevant to ensure the curb ramps are designed to standard. And we can also deploy what we call the sidewalk surface tester, which are the ATVs that are shown here. And it's essentially our way to augment a foot on the ground style survey. We send field operators out on top of these ATVs, which are outfitted with mobile mapping interfaces. And we use those vehicles to collect usually granular distress information on the sidewalk. So we're measuring faulting that we encounter, cracking that we encounter, excessive instances of excessive cross slope, et cetera. So all of that information can be appended to the existing data set that we provided as part of this survey, and create a more comprehensive idea of what the state of your pedestrian network actually is, and allow you to strategically prioritize rehabilitating these kind of assets. Any questions on the sidewalk and ramp portion of the survey?
Council, any questions here? Councilor Richardson.
Thank you. I'm just curious if you have identified, in the street portion of this, you identified streets that could use some TLC. Has that happened for this sidewalk portion of things as well?
Yeah, so while we were assigning condition type, the majority of the sidewalks appear to be in good shape, but there was a small percentage that fell into either the fair or the poor category, and those would be sidewalk segments that are in need of either rehabilitation or replacement.
And Caitlin, we have a map that shows where those segments are so that the city has access to know specifically where those are.
Oh, great. Right. Thank you. That's what I was more curious about. Appreciate it.
Mr. Coulter, do you want to add something there? One second on Zoom. Mr. Coulter, go ahead.
Yes, Mayor, through you. And we also have additional funding still left in this contract where we're able to go out and actually do some of this testing. We're able to identify, with what we're able to identify, be able to utilize that funding to do some of this. I believe in this next budget request, we've requested a little bit more in order to do a full assessment for the city. But right now we have a small amount to be able to potentially identify small sections currently through this contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor O'Doherty.
This would be of interest to the Disability Advisory Committee, and I was hoping that we could identify routes that are important to our disability community, if they could identify those and we could compare to those maps. Like if they got input from the public and gave you, or maybe you could recommend paths, like the best paths for people in a wheelchair to get from, to get around. Is that something that you could probably create from the data that you have?
Honorable Member, for you. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Caitlin, please start.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Parsons.
So I was going to say, that is something we've done in the past. Other agencies, for example, have areas of interest they've provided to us, that maybe schools or hospitals or things like that. And we can do a distance-based analysis to decide, if for example, certain sidewalks are within a certain threshold distance away from facilities like that, then they should be prioritized first.
And then to you, Mr. Holder.
Absolutely, and that's something that we'll be working with their team on as we move forward with this initial first part of the STT and LiDAR for the 80 ramps.
Councilor O'Doherty, and then to you, Councilor Shumway.
And I would encourage you to, if you want to speak to the Laramie Advisory Committee on Disabilities, they would probably love to hear about it or love to be a resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Shumway.
As far as sidewalks, curbs and gutters, I approached the city asking for information regarding a person that is disabled in a wheelchair, because their sidewalk, curb and gutter is impassable. And the answer came back, that's their responsibility. So unless, I think the only time that we as a city participate in reconstruction of sidewalks, curbs, and gutter is during new construction and complete reconstruction, and it may even have disappeared on complete reconstruction. So when we look to the people that have disabilities, I'm not sure we're doing them any favor by mandating that they go out and pay thousands of dollars to upgrade their sidewalks, curbs, and gutters. That seems to be something that, even though the city owns it, we don't maintain it, they do.
Thank you, Councilor. I think that is a fair point to be raised, and we should have a larger conversation about that part of it. Vice Mayor, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just curious, when that little device was perusing the sidewalks, and it comes back 80% good. Was it measuring kind of the evenness of the sidewalk? What was it really looking at to give a 80% good?
So this phase of the survey was exclusively based on our visual interpretation of the images we captured while we were driving the streets. So these conditions are based on, what we're seeing in the imagery. The purpose of showing that last slide with the other data collection equipment is really just to show that we can enhance this data set even further and use that equipment to capture, like you mentioned, cross slope issues or distresses like faulting and tripping hazards that are present along the segment that may or may not have been able to be seen in the imagery.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification, because I was thinking if those devices, those vehicles actually drove on the sidewalks, that our score might be a little different.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
I agree.
Any other questions, Council? City Clerk, thank you. Councilor Newman?
Thank you, Mayor. So my question is the 36 miles that it says that we have no sidewalk. That doesn't include the streets, the unpaved streets, because you guys didn't do an analysis on those, correct?
That's correct. So the mileage that we're coming up with, essentially what we do is we evaluate both sides of every street that we drove during the pavement survey. So of the roads that were driven during the pavement survey, we discovered 36 miles of right-of-way, basically, that is lacking in sidewalk.
Thank you, Mayor.
You bet, Councilor Newman. Great question. Any other questions, Council? Okay. We will be back to you all on Zoom if you have any other portions of this presentation for us, or any parting thoughts. Maybe Council will come up with more questions.
I think that's all that we have from our end. So we're wide open to any final questions or thoughts, but we really appreciate the opportunity to present. And we thank the city's team, Zeb and his colleagues, for helping us pull together the data necessary in order to get some good analyses and recommendations pulled together for y'all. So thank you again. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you as well. I'm going to go to Councilor Doherty and then to you, Councilor Shumway. There's a few more questions.
I was wondering, when you talked about revisiting the sites in a few years, your recommendation was to do one lane or another in multi-lanes. Is there a, does it typically degrade on the outside lane before the inside lane, or I guess it depends on turning? Is there one lane that has a rougher time?
That's an excellent question. And for arterial and collector roadways where you have channelized truck traffic, typically you end up with the outer lane deteriorating faster than the interior lanes. And that's typically, if you're on an interstate system, you might notice a little bit rougher pavement. Those outer lanes are a little bit rougher. Depending on how the pavements are constructed, though, it's possible that you can have deterioration not only in the outer lane, but on the inner lanes if the pavement is overall inadequate for the loading that it's subject to. So the outer lane is typically a cost-saving measure that we employ to kind of help, just reduce inspection costs if we are finding that the outer lane is in worse condition. And if that lane is driving the overall maintenance and rehabilitation of that pavement, why inspect the inner lane if the outer lane is in worse condition? And the decision as to whether or not to overlay or reconstruct is based off of the worst case. Let's just get that outer lane. Now, the city doesn't have that many miles of roadway. So doing, both lanes, both directions and everything, we're deadheading so much anyway. To just loop back and pick up everything, it's not that significant an increase in cost either. So the city would like to proceed forward with a apples to apples comparison in future years. The increase in cost would not be horrific.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Doherty. Councilor Shumway?
I have a question about the $170 million estimate for if we were to complete everything in 5 years. Does that exclude state highways, which are Grand Avenue, Curtis, 3rd Street, Snowy Range, and does it include unpaved streets, and does it include sidewalks, curbs, and gutters? The $170 million estimate.
Excellent questions. First and foremost, this is for pavement surface only. So we're not factoring in the concrete work or utility work required on any of these streets. So that's a low estimate. Okay. As far as the state routes, anything that's funded by the state, that's separate from our analysis. Now, ironically, we merged with the company International Cybernetics back in June of this year, and we have a contract to inspect all the state highways in Wyoming as well. So we're actually out collecting all the state routes annually also. So we have conditions for all of those. So those are funded by the state. As far as the curb and gutter, typically I add a 20% contingency for curb and gutter. So if you do want to take that $170 million and factor in curb and gutter, you can bump that up by 10 to 20%, and that will give you that will add in the curb and gutter. Utilities are difficult to estimate because we really don't know what the underlying conditions are of those. And then with respect to the unpaved roads, no, it does not include paving those roads or bringing those up to paved surfaces. So there would be an additional cost in adding those roads to that number would increase to accommodate those roads as well.
Thank you, Councilor Shumway. Councilor Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. Kurt, this might be a question for the city, but I'm curious about transition from state to city. 3rd and Ivinson, for example, the transition across the state highway onto the city is not very good. You got the state highway build up and then you drop down to the city, and it's not a real good transition. I was just curious your opinion on the responsibility of getting that transition smooth, who does that fall on?
I'll defer that one to
City engineer, go ahead.
Yeah, Your Honorable Mayor, through you. So when YDOT's going through 3rd Street, we try to work with some of those transitions as they go in and rehab, or even maybe when we're going in and rehab, we may kind of discuss those projects. If we can fix it, we try to do it at the time. However, based on street grade, sometimes it is difficult to get a full transition where, if the grades are really bad, or we may end up having to trace that back almost half a block to actually correct the issue. Sometimes you just try to do the best you can in that situation. But a lot of times in those transitions, we talk with YDOT and try to do the best we can in those areas. Sometimes we can fix them and improve them. Other times we're unable to.
Thank you, Mr. Japp. Council, any other questions? Go ahead. Yeah, Councilor Doherty, you're welcome to ask staff questions. That's all right. They may come back to them at some point.
So I was wondering how much of that is done in-house, like is the crack sealing done by the city? And maybe that's something we should look into, is become a road building company, the city. Thank you.
Director Webb, go ahead.
Councilor Doherty, through you, Mayor. Our streets department does do crack sealing every year with the short season, and the staff we have, we get as much as we can. But they do crack sealing every year.
And Director Webb, while you're here, how do we do the chip sealing, or is that's all contracted out?
Yeah, we'll contract out the chip sealing.
Okay.
We've got, I think this summer we've got, we're planning on getting quite a bit of chip sealing going. So what you're going to see in talking about upcoming budgets. So our fiscal 24 year, we're in the recommended budget that's coming to you. One of the items we put in there is we're asking for additional funds to do that more in detailed sidewalk ADA look. And then we talked in our work session a couple weeks ago about the changes we made there, where we're moving Alta Vista from a full mill and overlay to chip seal, and then bringing Buford 7th to 9th in. And that was all based on this evaluation, because those were projects that were outlined in fiscal year 24. Moving forward into 25, we're pretty much starting fresh, right? We got all new data, good information, and so as we start planning for the 25 recommended budget, you're going to see a lot of changes in the streets based off of this information that we have. And then our plan is every 2 to 3 years is to recommend to have the evaluation redone so that we can track that. Speaking back to Councilor Gabriel when he was talking about the housing project, so that evaluation was done before the project started, and that 3-year time frame or so when we come back will be about the time that's wrapping up. So it'll give us a general idea over there. So anyway, that's kind of our plan moving forward. Is for 25, we're starting fresh, all new data.
That's great. Thank you, Director Webb. I was curious about that, so thank you. Councilor Doherty?
This is for Mr. Brooks, too. Do you feel like the rubric that you developed for previous years for deciding the priority, is this going to affect, are you going to change your metrics based on these recommendations? Are you feel pretty good about your rubric, how you decide the priority? I know it's like 15 different things going on. Is that going to be modified based on this study?
Yeah, Councilor Doherty, through you, Mayor. I think a lot of that decision making is still going to be in place. I think what we're seeing with this information is it's so much more detailed. It's a lot less subjective than what we had before. So that piece of that rubric is going to be, I think, going to become a lot more important. And then getting the gosh, I can't remember what we call it now. The deflection on the base and stuff is, we didn't have that before, right? And the cores, so that's all new information that's going to go into that rubric. And so more information to evaluate, but I don't know that any of the items that we looked at before in our prioritization would necessarily go away. I think we're adding to it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Shumway.
Just a question, are you ready for comments yet?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
Here's something that seems to be fairly obvious to me, and I hope it is to the entire council. We're spending $3.1 million on street reconstruction. We need 15. I think we're probably going to have to go to the Detroit model, which was when they had an economic downturn, many of their streets went from paved to gravel. I don't know how we're going to sustain maintenance of our paved streets with 3.1 million when we need 5 times more just to stay where we are. We're in a very difficult situation. Until we move monies around and make major changes, our streets are going to continue to suffer.
Thank you, Councillor. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And on top of that, we've talked about tonight, it's been presented to us that once the difficulties begin, the deterioration becomes exponential. And so by not servicing now, then 2 years from now, it's exponentially worse. And that's very concerning.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other questions or comments, Council? I'm not sure, maybe this is a question for staff, whichever one of you wants to take it. I'm not sure it's going to be a question yet, but it might be. So Councillor Shumway brings up a really, I think, unfortunate point, but it may be a reality. I would be curious to know from your end, so this will be a question, what will our strategy be then? And I know that that's a big question, but this is a significant problem. I mean, this is a $10 million a year funding question. We don't have $10 million to go towards it. You all are the professionals at how we maintain a street system, and I'm not asking you to, to sort of squeeze juice out somewhere here, but I'm not sure how we move forward from here, and I think you all are more qualified than I am to chart that path.
Your Honor, Mayor, I don't know if we have a direct answer for that right now. As Mr. Webb said, we're going to start going through and analyzing. We have a lot of great data that came out of this, and yes, cost is a big concern, as it was noted. But our kind of plan is to start going through and analyzing a lot of this data and trying to put together the best plan for the city of Laramie. One thing that's been noted on this, and as council has noted, is that pavement preservation. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to take a step back and try to figure out where we can apply that pavement preservation. Some of the data that came out, we kind of have estimates of that year of when it's going to decrease and degrade past that time. So we'll be taking a look at, do we apply a chip seal on this street and maybe apply some more funding there and kind of try to balance that and see kind of where all that can play out and try to maximize our money to help do it. But at the end of the day, there is a budget issue that's going on there, but we're going to try to maximize that and do our best for the citizens of Laramie to get the best product we can out for them.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, City Engineer. And to that, sort of same point, Councilor Doherty, you mentioned, you two both discussed this conversation about ADA and sort of like where that falls. And I'm wondering, as we have the conversation and do the further, data collection around ADA compliance and sidewalk quality, if we can be really intentional about that and we start building sort of this the safe paths to school or safe streets, whatever it's called, safe path to school, if we start doing something quite similar with safe paths for folks who may be using a wheelchair or be otherwise differently abled in that regard, maybe, I know I'm now saying we should spend money on this after I just said no money. But I am curious. I mean, the city should participate, right? Like, it shouldn't be a mandate from the city that's not funded. And so if we're going to have a conversation, including our disabilities committee, and try to increase their opportunities to get around town without a vehicle, without calling the PATS bus or whatever, if we are, I think, intentional and sort of, as a council, start mapping those things, I do think there could be some value in us then funding those projects in portion or in whole. But I'm not sure if engineering has had any conversations surrounding that as well.
Well, Mayor, I don't know if this directly answers it, but as was kind of noted, whenever we go in and do a street rehab, we go through and improve all the ADA in that area and make sure that we're getting in compliance at that point in time. Council is also given engineering staff budget that we assist. So if there's someone on a corner that's wanting to replace some curb and gutter, we actually go in and help install those ADA improvements, and we'll actually pay for that ramp. So there is funding that is available for that. That's kind of a program that recently just kind of got started, but is actually growing quite a bit and quite a bit of popularity in trying to do. And we can also use that on projects. So maybe we're not going in and doing a full rehab, but we can use some of that funding also to help with projects. So, whenever we are in an area, we try to get in and improve the ADA to the best that we can within the funding that we do have. But if we're ever going in and rehabbing, there's no question about it that we do go in and have to bring that up to full ADA compliance at that time. So does that help answer your question on that? Or
yeah, I think it's useful to know. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure it. I think maybe a bigger conversation about where we are putting these dollars would be valuable. And I think most folks are going to say, if we ask the disabilities committee, they're going to say, like, just by virtue of their world, they're going to say, like, near their home, right? But where do they go from there? And so where are these shared spaces and these shared pathways or routes? I think because it won't always be corners, right? It could be the heaved sidewalk from a tree root, of course, that prevents them from going anywhere. And so I think maybe if the city had a plan in place for this kind of idea, like how these folks are going to move around, it might expand that program to be useful to somebody mid-block who has an equally burdensome issue with their sidewalk than maybe a hard curb at the end and not a ramp. Sorry for talking so much, Council. I've been bottling up my questions until the end. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I'm concerned, and this goes with the discussion that Councilor Shumway started about fairness. And we do house a large university for the size of state that we have. And it does, not meaning to be negative or anything, just the bottom line is that it places a burden on the municipality and on the upkeep of things as these things happen at the university. And I just would like to look at that more. If money has been appropriated during some funding and that money has not been dispersed, I'd like to know that. I'd like to catch up on that and to review past promises to see and to look at it in the future is what could we do? And I know that we try to do things to deal with it. We try to work with it. And it's often not successful. But I'm just wondering if we can continue to think about the fairness issue and how to address that.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Council, any other questions, comments? I don't expect it's worth scheduling at this point, but I would be interested in a work session regarding the strategy moving forward for streets specifically. Council can request it, but I think when you are ready, obviously we're in a budget process now. It's not going to happen before that, of course. I think that would be valuable to me. I don't know if the rest of council agrees, but I do think that would be worth having that conversation, so we're all aware of where we're headed. I think it took me a long time to know where we're headed before this conversation, so knowing after this would be helpful too. Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, I think a lot of it will become pretty obvious during the budget session when we can catch before we spend, right, or redirect some of that spending. So I think they're paying real close attention to that, which I'm absolutely grateful for. So thank you. I think maybe our discussion might need to occur once they've managed to sift through all the data, which is going to take a while, which is really cool data, which I really wish I would understand. But I think that's when it's going to be really telling, when Brooks was mentioning, for budget 25, 26, or future budgets. I think that's going to really help us. And, I don't know. I mean, if money grew on trees, I think we'd be in a much better situation. But it doesn't. And other counselor comments about our big partner, in our city, it's absolutely true. And it's not just about the roads. This is a huge topic, from fire trucks to roads to a wide selection of issues that we could talk about. So, yeah, we've got to do better. We probably have to assess a fee. We really have to let them know. So, yeah.
We can't keep supporting them.
Out of order.
Councilor O'Doherty.
Sorry.
I lost my train of thought.
All right, council, any other questions, comments? Councilor Richardson?
What other
Go ahead.
comments?
Yeah, of course.
I know that the staff has done a really good job of trying to seek out sources of funding, and I would, if there's any way we can be of assistance of trying to find additional sources of funding, I'd be more than happy to look into those, but that would also mean that I'd need to know, what sources of funding you all have already sought out. But I just keep coming back to this, the point that there's just a huge chunk that we are missing, and how can we at least start to kind of piece it together as best we can.
Thank you, Councilor. All right, Councilor O'Doherty, did it come back to you?
Yeah, I know, it had to do with the funding, and do we need to maybe budget more towards maintenance equipment? You would have asked for that, I think, if that was the way to go. But if we need to have more people, because our season is an hour and a half in July, our repair season, if that's a matter of getting more bodies or more equipment, I would like us to consider that. But I suspect you would have asked. So thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other comments or questions by the council? Okay, we're going to go to the public on this. I see we've got one on Zoom. City Clerk, go ahead and let Judy into the room. Good evening, Judy. When you're off mute and ready to comment, the floor is yours. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I think you can hear me now, maybe.
We sure can.
Okay, good enough. Thank you. It's nice to join you all again. It's been an unfortunate while, but it's good to see everybody. I have a couple questions and comments, and the questioning runs to a comment. In the presentation, I did not see, I did see some of the pictures, on down Sheridan, for example. One of the, and this is the question comment part, there was no discussion that I heard about the slope of the road going into the gutter and into the sidewalk. This is a personal issue right now with the ice. I mean, we get wonderful melting, and then it gets cold again, and it freezes up, and it's partly because of the slope of our road. I grant you, we are not on a major thoroughfare. We're in a neighborhood. But as I drive around town, I look at Sheridan, I look at Ivinson, Russell, Spring Creek, all of those somewhat major places, and I haven't been north of Reynolds to see what it's like there, but there seems to be, the slope of the road seems to be enhancing the ice buildup. Can the city help? Can Brooks or Eric or somebody from their group help with this problem and some kind of scraping the ice where it builds up? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy. It's good to see you too. Good to hear from you. We couldn't see you, but it's good to hear from you.
Okay.
All right. And I don't know, I mean, I guess my question would be, was the crowning of the streets, I believe it's called crowning when they build up like that, was that part of this conversation? Part of this data collection?
As far as the crowning of the streets go, we didn't take measurements of the actual geometry of the road. So the slope into, and I realize with mill and overlays, you can build up the crown a little bit if you're milling into the curb and gutter. So you might end up with a crown up to a point before the crown gets too steep and you have to actually mill and overlay the entire road. But we didn't do a drainage. A drainage study was not part of this project. But that is, it can definitely be. I understand the concern. It can become an issue if curb and gutter is deteriorating, or if successive mill and overlays have been done, and you do end up with a little bit of a drainage issue there.
Thank you. And Director Webb, I don't know. We don't typically have questions from the public that you have to answer, but I do think this one has been front of mind for a lot of council members as well.
Yeah, Mayor, I understand, and I just wanted to respond that our streets division is out almost every day cutting ice this time of year. If they're not plowing the snow, they're cutting ice. When I was going out to the Municipal Operations Center today, I saw the machines coming into town with ice cutters on them. So they're doing it every day. If people have issues with the ice, they can call the street division. Street division will take a look at it and prioritize that with what they're doing. It's happening all over town and limited on crews and equipment. So they prioritize those and get the worst ones they can first. But just call the street division. They'll take a look at it and prioritize it and get it taken care of where they can.
Thank you, Director Webb. Councilor Doherty.
I'd like to make a public service announcement about shoveling. And when people shovel into the curb, down onto the street, then that becomes ice, and then it doesn't go away all winter. So if people, I mean, some people, there isn't an option, and this ice is a problem everywhere, but I know at least in some places, it's where people have shoveled, pushed it off the sidewalk into the street, and then it's going to create that problem. So that's my public service announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Back to public comment. Is there any other members of the public that would like to speak on this work session? Mr. Montoya, go ahead. Give us your name for the record, if you wouldn't mind.
Paul Montoya, 1974 Truman Street. I wonder what discussions they have about ice down in Florida this time of year on streets. Probably very little. The only thing I would encourage the city and the city council to do, I think the topic of funding from the university for the impacts on the city are important. I don't know necessarily if this is a discussion to have directly with the university. I tend to think one thing we should encourage is for our state legislature to begin to look at impacts of facilities that are run by the state and see if some funding could be put together on a legislative level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montoya. Any other members of the public wish to speak? Okay, we will close the public comment period on that work session. I don't know if we go back to public comment again now. It's on the agenda, but I don't see any members of the public jumping up, so I'm going to go ahead and just move on through that one. Council, we are at item 4, which is going to be the council updates and comments. Who would like to go first? Anybody have any? You can go ahead and throw them both together if you'd like. Okay. Easy enough. This is quieter than usual. And I should thank you folks from IMS. You are free to leave at this point. I'm sorry I kept you around for just a minute. I really appreciate the presentation, and I know the council found value in it. So thank you for spending your evening with us.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Good presentation.
All right, council, we will move then, seeing no comments or anything of the sort. We're going to move into the agenda review. If you all would look through the consent agenda and let me know if there's anything that's jumping out to you.
Mayor?
Yeah, City Clerk.
Just of note, we did add another scheduled meeting this afternoon in response to a request for an additional work session. So after some conversation internally, we did add that item after our agenda meeting.
Okay, thank you. And council, you'll see that as 9J2.
Councilor Somerville, yeah, okay. Councilor Somerville and Councilor Newman, I'm realizing that you on the published agenda do not have the new scheduled work session. So it's March 28th at 6:00 p.m. It's the Albany County Historic Preservation Board for West Side Neighborhood Grant for research to become a historic district.
And City Clerk, will our planning staff be participating in that meeting as well?
They will, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on consent agenda, council? Okay, we're going to move on to the regular agenda. You will see that this meeting will hold our goals. If it wasn't clear to any, I reached out to everybody, but if it wasn't clear, because we postponed to this date, we are not able to hold a special meeting and then bring this item on the floor prior to that meeting. So our work session tomorrow will be strictly discussing changes we would like to see. Nothing will be moved or changed at that meeting. The exact item from our agenda will come back, that same table will come back on the 7th, and then we will make those changes by amendment during that meeting, just so that's clear for all of you. Any other questions on this section of the agenda? Okay. Easy enough. Council, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
See you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
We all.